Look, I think that one thing I take from your comments is I do think that we have in America a very poor understanding of Islam. I do think that there are important differences between Islam and the West that do need to be highlighted. For example, in Christianity, the martyr the term martyr is common to Christianity and Islam, but is understood very differently in the two religions. Because Christianity began, one may say, in defeat, with the persecuted Christians being pursued by the Roman Empire. The idea of the martyr was a sacrificial lamb, the Christian fed to the lion. In Islam, it's very different. The martyr is a guy who got on his horseback and went out to fight for Allah, to extend the empire of Muhammad and Islam, and died in battle. That's a very different understanding of martyrdom. Similarly, church and state. As I mentioned earlier, in Christianity, there has always been a conceptual separation. Even in the medieval times, even in the time of the Spanish Inquisition, if you committed blasphemy, you were tried by the church, but if you committed murder, you were tried by the state. So there's been this distinction throughout Christendom or Western civilization. Whereas in Islam, from the very beginning, church and state were united. Muhammad was not only a prophet, but a Caesar rolled into one. And therefore, Islam is in a way a religion more of law than of creed. In some senses, when we talk of separation of church and state, it's possible because you can privatize a creed. You can practice your religion in private. But if your religion is one of law, it's senseless to talk about privatizing your religion, because your religion, by necessity, has to influence, one may say, the organs of government and society. So I think that these are some genuine differences that we should be aware of. But I also think that there is a lot of foolishness that is said about Islam, particularly about traditional Islam. I want to make one point at this here, and that is that very often the radical Muslims who know that in the classical Islamic tradition, Judaism and Christianity are treated as precursors to Islam. Just as in Christianity we think of Christianity as incorporating and, one may say, superseding Judaism, Islam sees itself as incorporating and yet superseding both Judaism and Christianity, so that Moses and Christ are prophets in the Islamic canon. This is why the radical Muslims are extremely insistent that they are not fighting against Christianity. When they use the term crusader, as bin Laden does, he always means a pagan crusade. It is key to their argument that the West used to be Christian, but has now relinquished Christianity and is now pagan. The term the Muslims use is jahiliyyah. They mean the ignorance and polytheism that the Prophet Muhammad encountered in the Arabian desert with the Bedouins. And Islam has always taken a very dim view of polytheism and paganism. The basic idea is you have to respect fellow monotheists, but when it comes to non-believers and pagans, all manner of force is permitted.
San Diego, hello.
Yes, Dinesh, like you, I feel all the contradictions in the current political and cultural scene raised a conservative Catholic in a waspish Protestant country here with Southern and Eastern European parents, and then becoming more of a libertarian and trying to understand what my way of life means to my country and my way and the world at large. I think I sympathize with your position, but I'm worried that Islam, as you've just stated, is really a 500-year-old, very fundamentalist, although you somehow resist that term in some contexts. It's a very fundamentalist and inherently radical regime that would end up more like the Japanese kamikazes heading for the West Coast in 1945 if they had had a nuclear weapon. If we let these countries like Iran and other countries have their way, I think we're going to end up with kamikazes heading for this country with their nuclear weapons, and we don't have time for them to bridge the 500-year enlightenment that has modified the religions of the West. So you really cannot give these people the opportunity to take over countries, even with the moderates that you say are lurking there ready to take over. I'm really worried, Dinesh, that we're in a culture war, that we cannot take prisoners, and the first WMD that goes off in this country will suddenly bridge the gap with enlightenment. Germany and Japan found out that you shouldn't mess with a free country, and they ended up devastated. Now, the Middle East radicals may end up in the same place. Please comment.
Well, I think that you have to remember that you're right. The United States basically wiped out Germany and Japan. If what you say is true, we have before us a somber task, and that is fundamentally wiping out 1 out of every 5 people on the planet. There are 1 billion Muslims in the world, 1 out of 5. Can you imagine what it would even take for the United States to declare war on Islam itself? This to me is madness. Moreover, we are divided in this country now in a way that we weren't in World War II. There was a moral consensus in World War II that is not there today. In World War II, there were the same mistakes made, worse. The wrong places bombed, strategic blunders, friendly fire, a refusal to plan for what came afterward. Everything that is said about Iraq was true 10 times over in World War II, but nobody cared because the whole country was agreed that this war will only end in Berlin. This will only end with unconditional surrender from Japan. Now, we now have a country which is fighting in a very divided way. And can you imagine if on top of that we were fighting the entire Muslim world? I think, sir, you are setting forth a recipe for failure. I think that we are better off identifying the radical Muslims who are just as dangerous as you suggest and have exactly the aspirations that you talk about. And if they could get their hands on a dangerous weapon, would do exactly what the kamikazes would do with it. So it is all the more dangerous that these people, who I think are a significant minority in the Muslim world, I don't want to guess or bet, maybe 30% of the Muslim world, not terrorists, but maybe sympathize with radical Islam, but they have been recruiting from the ranks of traditional Islam. We are losing traditional Muslims to their camp. So if we don't find a way to stem that flow, if we don't find a way to wean away traditional Muslims from becoming radical Muslims, I fear we are lost.